Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Dirshu Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Hey. We're going to be learning today Meretz Hashem Daf Kuf Mem Daled Amud Aleph. We're holding in the middle of Siman Taf Kuf Yud Tes, and we begin today on the top line of Kuf Mem Daled Amud Aleph with Sif Gimel. Says the Mechaber, Lahatir, to open, Ulahafkia, to sort of break open, Valachtoich, or to cut, Chaisamais, Shebekalim, different types of seals that are on kalim, Vishebekarka, or something attached to the ground, or Lashaber Paischais, or to break locks, Kedinam B'Shabbos, the same halacha that applies on Shabbos, Kach Dinam B'Yom, that is the same halacha on Yom Tov. Vayin Siman Shin Yod Daled Siv Zayin, this was discussed in Hilchos Shabbos and Siman Shin Yod Daled, and it's complex. We're certainly not going to go and reiterate all of these halachas over here in Hilchos Yom Tov. We learned them already in Hilchos Shabbos. I would just mention quickly that over there in Shin Yod Daled, we discussed the halacha of opening up different types of kalim. Let's say you have a keli, a barrel that's tied, closed with a rope. It says you could untie it because it's not a kesher shel kayama. It's made to be opened and closed and opened and closed. So the halacha over there discusses various heterim, different cases where you are allowed. Let me see if I can just give you quickly. I think I have Mishnah Berurah over here. Shin Yod Daled, let me see. Shin Yod Daled Siv Zayin. Shin Yod Daled Siv Zayin. Yeah, it says over here in Siv Zayin and Shin Yod Daled Chaisama Shebekalim. If you have seals on kalim, Tigan Shida, Teva, Umigdal, different types of wardrobe units or closets, Shakisei Shalahem Kasher Behem Bechevel, that they were tied closed with a rope, Yachal Lahatira, you're allowed to untie it, and the Mishnah Berurah says over there you're allowed to untie it, the La Kesher Shel Kayamahu, it's not a Kesher Shel Kayama, Ay Lechat Chai Besakin, you would be allowed to cut the rope with a knife, and that wouldn't be a problem of Seiser, because Ein Stira Bekalim, Lahater Kaliyasai. It speaks over there about unbraiding the rope. That's a little bit more complex. That's beyond the scope of what we're going to do today. Then the Mechaber says, but if you have some kind of a lock that's made out of wood or out of metal, Asar lahafkia u'lashaber, that you're not allowed to crack open or break. The Bekalim Nami, and this is a very important line here in the Mechaber from Shin Yod Daled, which answers a question that I asked yesterday. The Bekalim Nami Shaykh Binyan Gomer Ustira Gemura, and that's really why I wanted to read this now. If you remember yesterday on Kuf Mem Gimel Amud Beis, it was troubling me that in Mishnah Berurah Ice Cotton Gimel, when we spoke yesterday about replacing the shutter on the kiosk, we said that you're not allowed to even the shutter that only had the one pin in the middle, which we said you are allowed to replace on Yom Tov, you can't replace it firmly. And the lashon of the Mishnah Berurah was v'imtaka, if you put it in place very firmly, heavy malacha gemura. And it was bothering me, that terminology, malacha gemura. I said malacha gemura is usually a lashon that we use when we're referring to a malacha da'araisa. And I didn't see over there how it meant a malacha da'araisa. The answer to the puzzle really comes from Siman Shin Yod Daled and Hilchos Shabbos, which we're referring to over here in Sif Gimel, which is that the Mechaber holds that even though we say Ein Binyan Ustira Bekalim, when it's something which is a malacha gemura, like for instance over there in Shin Yod Daled, when it speaks about breaking open a lock, that's already a malacha gemura. Then you're taking a lock and you're breaking it. That's a real stira. So by a malacha gemura, the Mechaber holds there is binyan and stira bekalim. And that's why when you would take the shutter and you would put it in place very firmly, that's already a malacha gemura. And even though we're talking about a movable kiosk, which is a keli, we would say there is binyan and stira by kalim. So then that would be a problem of baina. And so too over here. So when the Mechaber says here in Sif Gimel, when he speaks about the halacha of Lushaber Paisachais, and he says Kedinam b'Shabbos Kach Dinam b'Yom Tov, that would be something that's also on Shabbos and on Yom Tov. You're not allowed to break a lock open because that would be considered a malacha gemura. Okay, there is one Mishnah Berurah. I was cutting your bays. Siv Zayin. The Ramah made mention of Siman Shin Yudal Siv Zayin. Says the Mishnah Berurah of Sif Yud. You should see Sif Yud and Shin Yudal as well. Shesham Mavur Adin B'chol Pratehem. Over there, it is discussed in greater detail. Okay, Sif Dalet in the Mechaber, second line. Liktaim kash, to cut straw. Oy kisam, or a piece of wood. Oy teven, or some kind of stubble, chaff. Oy atse besamim, or different types of fragrant branches. Dinan b'yomtiv, kedinan b'Shabbos. Again, the same halacha that applies on Shabbos applies on Yom Tov. Kedeisa simin shin chav beis sif dalet. And the halacha of liktam kasha kisem teven is referring to somebody who wants to take a piece of wood and he wants to fashion it into a toothpick. So one of the interesting halachas over there in shin chav beis is that there's ein tikkun moneh. There's no isser of tikkun moneh when it comes to a meichel. So if you have some kind of stubble, some kind of chaff, which is used as animal fodder, then to take it and to cut it, to use it as a toothpick, would not be a problem of tikkun moneh. But to take a splinter of wood, which is not edible for a behemoth, that would be a problem of tikkun moneh. So these are also, again, various halachas that we discussed in Hilchos Shabbos that apply to Yom Tov as well. Now we go to Sif Hey. Kematim she'osim hanoshim bebatei zroyasein ubebatei shekein. The creases that women would typically make in the sleeves of their garments, ubebatei shekein, or something that they wear over their legs. Asar la'asaisan b'yom tov mishum tikkun moneh. The Gemara in Be'ah says that the making of these creases was considered even a ma'aseh uman. It's like giving it out to the dry cleaner to have it pressed. So pressing in creases into a garment is asar mishum tikkun moneh. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cutting you gimel. Be'batei is saying in the sleeves. You're also not allowed to make a crease on a collar. By using the blocks of wood that were typically used for this pressing purpose. This would also be also on chalamayid because it's considered a ma'aseh uman. Now we go to Siman Tov Kov Chaf, Lechabed Habayis, the halacha regarding sweeping a house, Ubay Sif Echad, and here we have one Sif. Says the Mechaber, Lechabed Habayis, to sweep a house, Kedinoi b'Shabbos, the same halacha that applies on Shabbos, Kach Dinoi b'Yom Tov, same din applies on Yom Tov, V'ayin La'el, Siman Shin Lamed Zayin, Sif Beis. Interestingly enough, Siman Shin Lamed Zayin is, I believe, one of the first simanim that we learned together when I took the share over from Rabbi Fried. I remember teaching you these halachas. By the way, I don't know if you're out there, Yankelevich. I remember you asked me a very good question when we were learning that siman. Not the only good question that you asked, but I specifically remember you asking me quite a good question on Siman Shin Lamed Zayin. Okay. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Katan Aleph, Ayin Le'el Siman Shin Lamed Zayin, Sham Mavur Hadinim HaKarka Hayim Marutzav Ushar Pratim. Over there in Shin Lamed Zayin in Hilchos Shabbos, we discussed at length the difference between sweeping an earthen floor versus sweeping a paved floor or a tiled floor. And in a nutshell, the problem with sweeping an earthen floor, there's a potential problem of baineh because of being mashve gumais. When you sweep, you might fill up holes that are in the floor, and that could be a problem of baineh. Also, when you're sweeping the floor, even according to those who don't consider the actual sweeping of the loose dirt into holes, they don't consider that to be a problem of mashve gumais because it's all loose dirt. But we're also afraid that once you're sweeping, you might be paying attention to the floor. If you see an actual hole in the floor, you might actually go and fill it up. That would zicha be a problem of baineh. So then the question comes up, okay, that's when we're dealing with earthen floors. But how about if you have a floor that's marutzav? If you have a floor that's paved or tiled over, you have a nice linoleum floor or a ceramic tile floor or a hardwood floor. Why is there a problem over there? Certainly there's no problem of mashve gumais. Question is there room for gzera or not? There's also a potential problem with the broom, depending on what kind of broom you use. Is there a problem that you might break the pieces of the broom? In a nutshell, I believe we said over there that if the majority of the houses in the area that you live, where certainly that's the case by us, if the majority of the houses have floors that are paved or finished tiled or hardwood floors, whatever they are, but they're finished floors, they're not earthen floors, then we say you are allowed to sweep on Shabbos. Now we go to Siman Tov Kuf Chaf Aleph. Din Shilshul Peres B'Yomtiv Mimakim Lamakim. The halacha of literally the word shilshul means lowering, transporting produce on Yom Tov from one place to another, or by Gimel Seifim. Says the Mechaber in Sif Aleph, Mashilin Perois Derech Aruba. Let's take a look right away at the Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Aleph. Mashilin Pirish, the explanation of this is, Sheyesh Loi Perois Al Hagag. We discussed many times in Shabbos that it was very typical in the times of the Mishnah, the Gemara, the Rishonim, to use a rooftop as a storage area. So if somebody was storing peros, he was storing produce up on the roof. And now he sees the rain clouds coming, and he realizes it's going to rain. And all of the produce that he has up on the roof might become ruined, and he's going to lose all of that money. The Chachamim or matter him to go do a tercha, even though that's not really appropriate for Yom Tov, to do this tercha, to be busy moving around produce on your rooftop. The Chachamim were matter this tercha, they allowed you to lower the produce into the house, derech aruba shebagag, through a skylight, or some other type of hatchway that there was in the roof. Al yedei chevel, either you would lower bundles, let's say you had bundles of wheat, so you could lower the bundles of wheat with a rope down through the trapdoor or through the skylight, or if it's other type of produce, you might just throw it through the hatchway and it'll fall into the building below. Since there isn't such a great tercha over here, it's only a question of opening up the hatch and pushing everything through the hatch. He tiralai, they will matter this mibnei hefsid mamoinai, so that the person should not take a significant financial loss. Avobeloi hefsid lai, but absent this concern of a hefsid, the chachama would not be matter this, because this would be considered a tercha yisera on Yom Tov, and it's not a tercha that's tzarich Yom Tov. So now the Mechaber said mashilin peros, produce. You're allowed to lower the produce. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cutting base peros. Even if he had a lot of peros on the roof, he's allowed to be busy on Yom Tov lowering all of this produce down through the aruba, through the skylight, to save himself from taking the financial loss. So the Mechaber says, Mashilin peros derech aruba. You're allowed to lower the produce down through the aruba. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cutting gimel aruba. What's an aruba? Hu chaloin ha'asoy b'tikras hagag. That is a window that's made in the ceiling, meaning it's the ceiling of the top floor of the house, which essentially is the roof. So by opening that window, you have a hatchway going into the building below. And the Ramah says over here, Pirush, what does this mean, mashilin? What's this lashon of mashilin? Explains the Ramah, Pirush, min ki yishal zeisecha. And the pasuk in the Teichacha says, ki yishal zeisecha. The trees will drop your olives. This lashon of yishal and mashilin means to drop or to lower. So the Mishnah Berurah, the Ramah explains here what the Mechaber means when he says mashilin is koloimar. He means to say mapilin aperes laaretz. You can drop the peres down b'yomtiv on yomtiv. V'lo yishal shalem. The Mechaber continues. V'lo yishal shalem b'chaloinos. You are not allowed to lower the produce off the roof using a window. Let's take a look right away in the Mishnah Berurah to explain what he means. V'lo yishal shalem b'chaloinos. Ice cut and dalid. Ritzaynai loymar. What the Mechaber over here is saying when he tells you can't lower it through a window. Ritzaynai loymar. What he wants to say is, Emahaya hagag mukaf mechitzos. Let's say the roof had a wall around it. It was enclosed with a wall. And on one of the walls around the roof, there's a window. Asur lahiridam derech sham bechevel. You're not allowed to open up that window and then take the produce and lower it out the window down to the ground. You're not allowed to do that. Why? Because this already involves a greater level of tercha than merely lowering the produce down through a skylight or through a hatch. Because over here, says the Mishnah Berurah, because now if there's a wall around the roof and there's a window in the wall, now you have to pick the produce up, you have to lift it up to the window, put it through the window, and then lower it down. Now already it's a tercha yisera. When we were talking about a skylight, so there's essentially an opening on the floor of the roof, so you just open that and you push the peiros through, that's not a big deal. But to lift it up to the window and then lower it down out the window, that the Chazal already decided they had to make a line somewhere. They had to make a geder somehow. So this is the geder that they said. If you already have to lift it up to put it out the window, that's a tercha yisera, that's awesome. Continues the Mishnah Berurah. Even if you're just going to pick it up to the window, and now just flip it out the window. So you're not going to be busy lowering it out the window. That's still aser. Because you still had the tercha yisera of having to lift the produce up to the level of the window. However, if the window in the wall around the roof is very, very low, shavalagag, so that it's mamish at the floor level of the roof, the leka tercha yisera, so there is no tercha yisera of having to lift the produce up to the level of the window. Mistaber the mutter, k'mayder charuba. Then the Chavetz Chaim says it makes sense to say that would be mutter, the same way lowering it through the skylight is mutter. Okay, let's go back to the Mechaber. The Mechaber continues in the middle of the second line. So he said, you're not allowed to lift it up to the window and then lower it out the window. You're also not allowed to remove the produce from the roof using a ladder. You can't take the produce and then climb down a ladder. Okay, says the Mishnah Berurah is cutting hay b'sulamais. What the Mechaber wants to say is, let's say you had sacks of produce. Likach hasakim, you want to take the sacks. Ulahiridam lamata, you want to take them down off the roof. Derech hasulam, using a ladder. You're not allowed to do that. V'hu adin, and the same halacha would apply. B'madrego shalanu, if you have steps like we do. So you have a door going up to the roof, and then you have a flight of steps coming down. So you want to go and take the sacks of produce off the roof and then go down the steps to the ground floor. You can't do that. That's also considered a tercha yisera. Continues the Mishnah Berurah, second line near the end by the ice cut and vav of the Mishnah Berurah. You're also not allowed to move the produce from one rooftop to an adjoining rooftop. Let's say Reuven and Shimon have houses right next to each other. Reuven doesn't have a skylight in his roof, so he doesn't have the option of lowering the produce down through a skylight. But Shimon, who lives right next door, has a skylight. So Reuven says, okay, great, I'll move my produce from my roof to your roof next door, and then we'll lower it down through the skylight. Says the Mechaber, no. You're not allowed to move the produce from one roof to the other. Even if they're on the same level. So it's not like you have to go up to a higher roof. No, the roofs are on the same level. You can't move it from one roof to another. Says the Mishnah Berurah, is cut involved. This roof doesn't have a skylight. So he wants to move the produce from his roof to the roof next door, because that one has a skylight. He wants to use that skylight to lower the peiros down into the building. Also, that's forbidden. The next of tercha yisera, because that's also called a tercha yisera. And certainly, if we're not talking about that there are big rain clouds coming on the horizon, if there doesn't seem to be any risk of a hefsid, you're also not allowed to do any of these things. Ice cut and zayin, you're not allowed to move the produce from one roof to the other, even though they're on the same level. So that one roof is not higher than the other. You're still not allowed to do this. Siv Beis in the Mechaber. Mutar lechasois peiros oikadayayin. you're allowed to cover up produce or jugs of wine, oy levanim, or stacks of bricks, mipnei hadelef, because of a leak. There's a leak and water is coming in and these things are going to get wet. So you're allowed to cover these things up. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Katan Ches. Oy levanim, afilu e muktzah, even though you have bricks that are muktzah, kagoin shein sturais v'aimdais lebinyan. If you have nice, neat stacks of bricks in your yard or on your rooftop, and they're sitting there waiting to be used for building purposes, they're muktzah. You're mesiach das from them. They're set aside for binyan. So they're muktzah. Still in all, you're allowed to go get a tarp and throw a tarp over it, even though you're being metaltal the tarp, you're handling the tarp, litzorich davar muktzah, you're still allowed to do that. You're allowed to cover them up so that they should not become disintegrated. Sif Gimel. Litain kli tachas hadelef. Let's say you have a leak in your roof and water is coming in, it's dripping in. So you want to take a bucket, you want to put a bucket under the leak. Says the Mechaber, litain kli tachas hadelef, to put a bucket under a leak. Kedinoi b'Shabbos, the same halacha that applies on Shabbos. Kach dinoi b'Yom Tov, that's the din that applies on Yom Tov. V'ayin le'el simin shel lamed ches sif ches. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut and test. Litain kli tachas hadelef, to put a keli, a bucket underneath a leak. Shedoileif derech hatikra, there's a leak coming in through the roof, and you want to put a bucket there kedei shelo yitanef es habayis, so that the house shouldn't get dirty. You have a leak coming in from the roof. There's going to be a flood upstairs. So you want to take a bucket, you want to put a bucket there to catch the water. So the Mechaber says that the halacha for this is the same on Yom Tov as on Shabbos. What's the halacha on Shabbos? So there's a couple of very interesting questions that come into play with this halacha when you want to put a bucket under a leak. Let's say it's raining outside, and the water that's coming in through the leak is rainwater. What's the muktzah status of rainwater? Now, on the one hand, you might be tempted to say that the rainwater is noilad, right? Because it was in the sky, and now it came on Shabbos. So maybe it's noilad. But the Gemara in Eruvin says that rainwater is not noilad. The Gemara in Eruvin says that the rain, it already existed before Shabbos. It was contained in the clouds. And the Gemara makes a distinction. The Gemara says that it's not absorbed in the clouds. So that it's only water vapor that's absorbed in the cloud, and now it became rain, now it became mayim, it became geshem, so now it should be noilad. The Gemara says no, it's michunasim. The water is contained in the cloud, but it's already water, and therefore there's no problem here of noilad. Therefore, the Mechaber says in Siman Shel Lamed Chesed Hilchos Shabbos that you don't have a noilad or a muktzah problem inherently on the water. The problem is, what if the water is dirty and the water is not roi, either for shtia or rechitza? So if the water is dirty water, now maybe it's dirty because it landed on your dirty roof, and before it got a chance to leak into the house, it got filthy. But the bottom line is, if it's dirty water that can't be used for anything, so then it's muktzah because it has no Shabbos use. And that's a muktzah problem. Now, if the water is taka muktzah, then if you want to take a bucket, you want to put a bucket under the leak, well, what are you doing? You're setting up a bucket. Now, this bucket is not muktzah at all. This bucket is eminently usable on Shabbos. But if you take that bucket that wasn't muktzah and you put it under a leak and you let muktzah water fall into the bucket, now the bucket is going to become muktzah. And since the bucket is going to become muktzah, there's a problem of bittul kli mehechanoi. You had a keli that was usable on Shabbos, usable on Yom Tov, and by allowing muktzah water to flow into it, you made the keli not usable on Shabbos or Yom Tov. That, according to most Mefarshim, is a problem of seiser. You destroyed a functioning keli. It was a functioning keli. You were allowed to use it. Now it's no longer a functional keli because you're not allowed to use it. So that's a problem of bittul kli mehechanoi. So therefore, what the Mechaber says over there in Shin Lamed Ches is, you have this delef, you have this leak. It depends. If the water is roi, either to feed to an animal or to drink yourself or for rechitza, so then okay. So then it's not muktzah. It's not going to make the keli muktzah. There's no problem with bittul kli mehechanoi. But if it's not roi l'rechitza, and you put a bucket, then you're not allowed to put a bucket there, because putting a bucket there would constitute bittul kli mehechanai. Okay. You know what? I think we're going to stop over here, and Mirza Hashem on Sunday we'll pick up on the bottom over here with a new Siman, with Siman Tuf Kuf Chaf Beis. I'm recording this share on Erev Shabbos. I'm not sure when the Olam is going to see it. If you see it before Shabbos, you should have a wonderful Shabbos. If you see it after Shabbos, I hope you had a wonderful Shabbos. Thank you so much for joining me for Liman HaTorah. The exclusive Liman HaTorah should stand God's Klal Yisrael in good stead. And Rabbi Hashem should send Yeshuas and Refuahs and everything wonderful to all of Klal Yisrael. Be well.